with us here this evening as we gather together for the 16th Marcus Garvey Memorial Lecture. And our esteemed lecturer today is, of course, the great Professor Gus John. But he will be introduced later. Because you see, I don't know him long enough to give him a welcome as he deserves.
Yes.
And therefore I shall hand that over to Cecil, who has probably known him for 50 years, probably more. So, the pleasure is yet to come. I am Claire Holder, and I am merely chairing the proceedings today. So I shall call upon Sister Wynne. Can you please start your libations?
Greetings, Africa.
Greetings.
Greetings, Africa.
Greetings.
Greetings, Africa.
Greetings.
Right here and now, this is our space. It's been allocated to us, and we behave like Africans, of course, with wisdom. I give thanks to PSCF and inviting me to do libation, and it's always a pleasure to do so. If that is my duty, I shall do it with the best of me. When I do libation, I just don't think about us, but I also do libation for all the other beings that occupy Mother Earth with us. So here we acknowledging them. I'm not going cuckoo, but they are part of the system and the rhythm of life, and we must always give acknowledge to them because they were here before us. So first and foremost, I give thanks and acknowledgement to the Creator Mother, Father, in acknowledgement of the male and female energy that runs through all of creation. I pour libation to the source, the all, the one, the essence, the substance, you say?
Yes, sure.
I give thanks and acknowledgement to the universe, all the planets, and their vibrational frequency that nourish us, you say?
Yes, sure.
I acknowledge the star system from which we made our journey to Earth. Some are in Orion,
Yes, sure.
Sirius A, B, and C.
Yes, sure.
And I acknowledge the Intergalactical Confederation. Important people, when you're praying to acknowledge them, I acknowledge them today.
Yes, sure.
I acknowledge Mother Earth and all her inhabitants, be they trees, be they insects, be they reptiles, be they birds, be they fishes, and us human beings. We acknowledge them.
Yes,
I pour libation to our ancestral heritage from our mothers. We give thanks for them. He said.
sure.
I pour libation in acknowledgement to our ancestors from our father's side. He said. I give acknowledgement to the overlighting spirits, the watchers of our nation on this planet, Ashe.
Sure.
I pour libation to the guardians of the great continent, Mother Africa, Ashe. I pour libation in acknowledgement of the energy that we honor this evening, Marcus Medai Garvey, his mother, his father, going way back to the first of their incarnation, they say. Brother Gus, I'm not embarrassing you. I pour libation to Brother Professor Gus John for his ancestors on his mother's side and the messages that she has deposited in him, they say. I pour libation for his paternal side, the seed carrier that carried the major codes of his existence. We acknowledge him this day. And I pour libation in thanksgiving for your chi that kept you on your journey, on your purpose. and may you continue to honor your chief and your ancestors, is said. And to all of us here in this room, I pour libation in acknowledgement for your purpose for this day, this time and season, as Mother Earth goes through her recycling, when we people have to go back to our original place to govern this planet again, is said. And to my ancestors on my mother's side, I say thank you. On my father's side, I say thank you. And to those that I don't know, but they know me, I say thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Was that comprehensive or not? You remembered everybody? Thank you, Sister Wynne. Thank you. And I'll call upon Professor Henriquez, who will give us the institutional welcome.
Yes, but first of all, I'd like to just give thanks for this evening and for all of the audience and for our speaker and for everybody involved, because it's an honour for me to welcome you to Goldsmiths. And I'm a professor in the Media, Communications and Cultural Studies Department, or now we call it a school, and I see it as an important part of my responsibilities is to be able to share some of the resources that the university has. Because in these days of commercialisation and privatisation and gentrification, and you know it, right? It's very important that we hold these spaces as long as we can and for as best purpose as we can. And I can't think of a better purpose than having this celebration of Marcus Garvey's life here tonight. And I can't think of a better speaker than Professor Gus John. And Gus John and I, perhaps even longer than Brother Cecil has known. So there's no competition here. But we've both been around a long time, so it's an honour to have you here, sir. And I'm really looking forward to this evening's proceedings. And welcome from University of Goldsmiths.
Thank you.
This is the third venue of this lecture, and we are grateful to Professor Julian Henriquez, who when it ran into trouble with Garvey's, the place in which he studied. Thank you, alma mater, the very thing I'm looking for. and so there was that difficulty, and Julian unhesitatingly stepped in and has been wonderfully supportive for the past few years. The first one of these I delivered. It was a disaster, and I think this brother has to, he was a chair, and I think he has to blame, something to blame, because I think I took too big a sip of the libation rum. But we've had some wonderful lecturers. We've had Sister Esther Stanford, we've had Dr. Asher Stefanat Wadasi, and many others. We had last year Professor Kende Andrews. Julian actually delivered one of these lectures, and so many fine minds have graced us in the delivery of this. I think I saw our brother Foakan come in, and he delivered a marvelous one of these. So we've been all over with some very fine people, and Gus is in that tradition. Now, as I said, I don't think Professor Gus needs much introduction, but frequently, when it's said that the person don't need an introduction, it's because there's not really a lot to say about him. In fact, there is a great deal to say about Professor Gus. And somebody said we've known each other a long time. We haven't necessarily been close. And I tell you about, I heard about him before I met him. I was in negotiation with the first director of the Runnymede Trust, a man called Deepak Nandi. Deepak was talking to me about doing a piece of work in Birmingham around youth and policing. And Deepak suddenly said, "Don't bother, I found this marvelous man to conduct the work," and it led to these two books, Because They're Black and Police Power and Black People. And they came out in the 70s, a long time ago. People remember Bernard Cord for this. What people don't know is that people like Gus and others were in an organization behind the research for this. And Gus was central, absolutely central in that. What people don't know is that Gus was a key figure in the process whereby the state who appointed a man that they thought was a reactionary and may very well have been, because of the quality of the push behind him, including that provided by Gus, he ended up making an announcement, correct, which Scarman had resisted, that this is an institutionally racist place. Gus was part of the process that led that. People don't know his work, but Murder in the Playground, a terrible murder in the north of England of an Indian young man. Bangladeshi, yes, sorry. But importantly, crucial work was done in that context, and Gus was central to that crucial work. People hear him talking about, and people even hear him being denounced as the man who is talking negatively with regard to Windrush. The truth of the matter is that we really were not invited here. When we came in 48, the state was surprised and distressed. And the cabinet thought and said that what really needed to happen was for these black people to be put back on the ship and sent to Africa to work on the groundnut scheme, right? And then, having been surprised in the context of the 1948 Nationality Act, that black people weren't expected to come, even though the legislation said, without let or hindrance, wherever you want to go. What they then discovered is that they didn't have a mechanism for enforcing racist immigration law. They actually took them from 1948 to 1962 before they could find a solution for the racist immigration law that they intended. And all of the immigration law since then has been racist. Now, one last thing about Professor Gus. We've had worked closely together in two things. Something called ROC, which was about reclaiming our carnival. We failed, but Gus and I did some, to my mind anyway, extraordinary things in that process, including forcing the local authority to fund an investigation into their economic relationship with the carnival, which showed how over the decades they had stolen the money of the carnival. One other thing, and this is very close to my heart. There's a brother called Reverend Huey Andrews.
Yes, sir.
And when the Methodist Church came down on him in an extraordinarily racist way, Professor Gus John, and I remember it like it was yesterday, made mincemeat of their case against Huey. He's extraordinarily able, and I am looking forward to hearing from him tonight. Brother Gus.
Well, all I can say is that they all make me feel terribly old. And I'm only 80.
Not you one.
Sisters and brothers, it is wonderful to see you all here, especially given the fact that out there is yet another one of those very rare occasions when you can see that the weather is agreeable. So thank you for making the space and being committed to memorializing the great Marcus Mosiah Garvey and coming to this lecture. I've called it Repairing and Building Africa at Home and Abroad, and the reason for that I'm sure you already know, but it will become clearer as I go along. But before I get into this, let me just do a kind of temperature check, which I'm sure we would all identify with. It occurred to me 10 days ago when I had to take on a school in Manchester on behalf of my granddaughter who's in year 9, that this country is totally incapable of learning anything. Because in 1965, at the age of 20, I was having the same arguments with head teachers in the city of Oxford, where I was studying theology and supporting parents who worked in car factories and in the teaching hospitals in those days. We've had endless race relations legislation, we've had inquiries, we had commissions, we've had all sorts of stuff. But the leadership in schools today is frankly, with a few exceptions, as ignorant and disinterested, more to the point, as they were in 1965. But it's not just that. If you cast your mind back to last year, July, and what happened in that atrocious event in Southport, where these 3 young girls, children, were murdered. And the way that was dealt with, even before the nation knew who the murderer was, and what happened when they did know who the murderer was, and compare that to Liverpool a couple of weeks ago during that parade to mark the Liverpool Football Club victory, where a white male, Doyle, 53 years old, rammed a car into a crowd. Thankfully, nobody died, but lots of people were injured and had to go to hospital and all that kind of stuff. What was interesting is that even though the police decided that they would not, they would say that the assailant, the man involved was a white man, so that people wouldn't jump to conclusions and go on social media and whip up neo-Nazi hatred, the media set about rehabilitating him even before he was charged. He was a local businessman, a married man with 3 children, an ex-commando in the British Army, etc., etc., etc. No monstrous representations of him, no monstrous images in the media. And then the police decided to charge him with dangerous driving and intent to cause grievous bodily harm. Had he been Muslim, you know the rest. Okay. There's that. And then there is the incredible situation of the Secretary, Attorney General, whatever her name is, Mahmoud. determining when judges, senior judges determined that they needed to revise the sentencing laws so that they could gather social inquiry reports on a certain category of offender before they sentenced them. The Daily Mail and the usual suspects got up and talked about two-tier policing and the rest of it. Now, what does the Attorney General, the leading law person in the country, do? Labour and Asian, born in Britain in 1980, she gets up and says, no two-tier policing under my watch, and coerced the Sentencing Council to abandon their plans to revise the sentencing guidelines, or else she would bring legislation to stop them. No regard for the fact that for decades, black people had been criminal, especially young people and young males, criminalized by the police, with the system, with the state encouraging it. Sus laws, stop and search, Section 60 stop and search powers, and all the rest of it. And then when they were criminalized like that in their youth, and they brought on the hostile environment, they were using those same crimes against them to boot them out of the country, having lived here for over 60 years. Why am I saying all of this? I'm saying it to paint, if you like, a backcloth to why it is that Marcus Garvey and his message is still as important today as it was when he lived and when he died in 1940. What I want to do now is to attempt to do these things. Next one. I want to talk a bit about my birth in Grenada and my relationship to Africa. How I went about negotiating a Caribbean identity that was forged in Britain, and everybody here would know what that means. My discovery of Marcus Garvey, my life experience for 60 years in the belly of this particular wretched beast, understanding and resisting colonialism as an active process happening now and not just as something in the past, unifying the divided African self, and arguing that the struggle for human liberation frames the struggle for African liberation. Don't discuss it with the person next to you now, or listen to me instead. Reparations, who is repairing what and where? And after reparations, what? And the unfinished business of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Now, in order to unpack all of that, I hope you've been told that this conclave would rise at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So who is this fellow Gus John? I have been perplexed since I was born, and I remain perplexed as to where this name came from. I do not know who my African ancestors were. I am told they were Yoruba. I do not know what their names were. My father was given the name John. My mother's parents were Louison. My mother's father was Hines. I think he was sold from Barbados to Grenada. None of that resembles anything African. And so for me, the business of forming identity and where that comes from and what I connect with ancestrally is critical. and it remains for too many of us unfinished business. So through what lens do I see the world? My lens is an African lens because it can't be anything else as far as I'm concerned. And I'll tell you why later on. And I experience being in the world as someone who grew up in dire poverty, having to deal with colorism and class in the Caribbean context, even in that little village, even within my own family. There were those who were petty bourgeois, yellow-colored, elitist, and believing that by virtue of their tincture, they were entitled to all kinds of privileges. So they looked upon me and my father and my mother, my father was functionally illiterate, as literally the poor cousins. And we had to deal with all of that and navigate our way through all of that, even though nobody called me black in Grenada. I did not discover issues about blackness and who is colored and who is that and the next thing until I came to this country. Next one. So this is what I am. Omobowale is the name I was given when I was initiated into the Ifa tradition some 20, 25 years ago. Augustine is the name I acquired, I took on when I joined a religious order. I came to this country not to work, but as a theological student. I had the crazy idea that I would become a Roman Catholic priest. And God knows that I wouldn't have lasted very long. So when I chose Ifa, which as I understand it was the religion of my great-grandparents and my grandparents, I was given the name Omobowale, the child has returned. And that was in Yoruba land in Nigeria. So I was born in the Caribbean, but Africa was born in me, not because I read books about Africa, or I read stories, or I knew people who were African. That's not what I mean by Africa being born in me. We had Sister Wynne take us through a process of greeting and welcoming ancestors amongst us. We had the drum from Brother Shaka inviting the ancestors to be with us. And in his poem, he made the point, spirit does not die. And although the people who enslaved us took our ancestors from the motherland and did all kinds of barbaric things to them, including heaving them overboard ships and all the rest of it, they killed people's bodies, they messed up their minds, but they could never kill their spirit. And the spirit of our ancestors continued to be with us in St. Kitts, Nevis, Grenada, Barbados, Jamaica. They continue to be there. And it is because they continue to be there that so many of us survived that Holocaust that was enslavement. And it is in that sense that Africa was born in me. And I do not believe that it is an accident that when the time came, when it was right, when the Orishas decided, I too was chosen to go back to that tradition and be an Orisha priest. So I'm from the Caribbean, happened to be the place of my birth, but I am not of the Caribbean. Next one. And all of that you can identify with. It's true of all of us in this room. I hope we're all Pan-Africanists. I hope we are all committed to the reunification of Africa and its diaspora, mentally and spiritually, if not physically. Some of us have relocated and have made the place our habitual home. But that's not going to be true of everybody. And throughout my life, in my life experience with Britain in the Caribbean until the age of 19, and in the 60 years that I have spent in this place, I have been engaged in the struggle for human liberation. Next one. That's what I am. What I am not is all of these things. And let me just comment a bit about the person of color thing. I loathe that term with a vengeance. And you know, the only sense I can make of that is this. If I'm a person of color, it means that by the time the Creator got around to creating white people, she had run out of melanin. And yet, we are called people of color. Nobody refers to white people as people without color. What the hell is that about? So don't come that nonsense with me, no way. I'm no damn person of color. As for the Windrush generation, I shall say no more. Brother Cecil has dealt with that appropriately. Next one. Okay, so that's, again, is something that we know. When I say that I was born in the Caribbean, but not of the Caribbean people were all of those, and they were exterminated with massacres and annihilation and the rest of it. So we were transported there to replace them. They were destroyed and annihilated to make space for us. And we, of course, had to adapt to our brutal environment and to preserve our heritage as best we could. My brother mentioned Kumina. I could mention Orisha and all the deities, Shango, Oshun, Obatala, and the rest of them. Next one. So we were adopting to, and we were socialized within colonial rule. And with that, daily manifestations of white supremacy, white privilege as an entitlement, and many of us came to accept that the entitlement of white people meant we needed to be subordinate, deferential, and subjugated. The supremacy of Christianity, and I could go on till tomorrow about that one, causing mayhem now in the Caribbean and across Africa. And frankly, if I were, okay, I promise you, there's nothing dictatorial about me. I'm not a Donald Trump, right? But if I were the head of an African state, the first thing I would do is to disallow any more churches in my country. I won't harass the Christians who are already there, but don't propagate no church and all that represents in terms of continuing the erasure that colonizers did of our own ancestral traditions and beliefs. The hegemony of language. Recently we lost one of the most important sons of Africa, Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And I dedicate this lecture to him. He was my mentor and my friend. And I well recall, as I said in the tribute I did to him recently, I well recall the time when I was chair of the Black Parents Movement in Manchester. And we organized the staging of the play, The Trial of Dedan Kimathi, the Mau Mau leader who was murdered by the British. And Michere Mugo actually came and directed the play in Manchester. An audience as big as this. And Ngugi graced us with his presence, and we had the most amazing Q&A after the film. He talked about his own imprisonment in Kenya. He talked about Daniel Arap Moi, who was a stooge of the British. He talked about the barbarism that was visited upon the Mau Mau freedom fighters. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. And why he started writing in his own Kikuyu language. The most eloquent, comprehensive analysis of language hegemony that I've heard anywhere. Never mind Wittgenstein and all of that lot. And then, of course, as part of that socialization, there was a denigration of everything African. Next one. To the extent that my godfather, whom I loved, but frankly, he was a very difficult man. He was the principal of our primary school. And practically every single day, we had to sing this wretched hymn. Thy kingdom come, O God, thy rule, O Christ, begin. Break with an iron rod the tyranny of sin. And then this verse. I highlighted the darkness bit, okay? Next one. This man, Hensley, who wrote the hymn, had a vision of the morning star lightening the darkness over heathen lands. Nobody ever said to us in that school that they were talking about Africa, but it was very, very clear. So Africa was associated with paganism, heathenism, and the rest of it. And the church was not just giving divine absolution to the imperialists and the planters and all of those committing genocide. It was actually participating in all of that. Next one. And then, of course, we all know about Joseph Conrad and his celebrated novel, The Heart of Darkness. The same year, that 1900, that the first Pan-African Congress was held in London, there were people in various societies going around talking about that book, promoting it, etc. It was published as a journal publication in 1899 and actually published as a book in 1902. And the darkness theme continues. Next one. So that was 1900, 1902. 1963, one of the most eminent historians in this country. And that is what the man was saying. 1963. By then, it was almost 20 years after Eric Williams had written Capitalism and Slavery. Basil Davidson had written all kinds of stuff about Africa, South, West, North. And that's what Trevor Roper had to say. In other words, the darkness theme ran through pretty much everything. Next one. And so to Marcus Garvey. I didn't discover Garvey in Grenada myself. All the adults around me were Garveyites, effectively. And they talked reverently about the man and what he represented, and how what he represented was a beacon of hope for them because of what they were going through daily on plantations and at the hands of the white colonial establishment. And later on, of course, I became very familiar with the many tomes, many volumes that Robert Hill did on Garvey, Tony Martin from Trinidad, similarly, at Wellesley College in Boston. Our own Colin Grant wrote about Garvey a few years ago, and more recently, Liz McKee, writing about the significance of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Next one. So, one cannot underestimate the impact that the UNIA had on black political struggles and movements, not only in this country, not only in the Caribbean, where it was resisted to a very large extent, but also across the world. Nigeria, Liberia. There were very few places around the world who had not at least been debating Garvey and what he stood for, what he represented, and what he had hoped could come about. And of course, he influenced the labor movements and colonial struggles in the Caribbean throughout the 1920s, after the First World War and the 1930s. And I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. Arthur Lewis, Professor Arthur Lewis, who became the first Nobel laureate from St. Lucia, wrote this enormously important book, Labor in the West Indies. He wrote it first as a Fabian pamphlet and sent it to the Fabian Society here in London, talking about the conditions under which people were living, not just working, living, subsisting in the Caribbean. And the wave of revolts that there were, worker uprisings in that region in that 1930s period. Next one. It's a very important book. It was republished, I can't remember in what year, by John LaRose and New Beacon Books, with an afterword by that famous Trinidadian sociologist, too little known, Dr. Suzanne Craig. It's a particularly important book if we are to understand ourselves and understand how we come to be in this place. Because everything that Brother Cecil was saying needs to be taken on board. Next one. Okay, so what I want to do for the next few slides is to talk about that very important event, 13th of August 1920, at Liberty Hall in New York, when the Garveyites, UNIA and others got together, and at the end of an 11-day period, I think it was, they came up with those declarations. It's got 54 clauses, well worth studying, because as you reread them, you see how the man was prescient. He had a vision of the world and what would evolve, what would transpire. And practically everything that he talked about there we're still dealing with, or have had to deal with, since his passing in 1940. So I strongly commend those declarations to you. Next one. And I won't go through the whole 54, you'd be pleased to hear. I want to mention only two. Read this one. Most of us, I'm sure, would remember the Mangrove trial. That is what Dorcas Howe was arguing in that court at that time. And effectively, he and Ian MacDonald, representing him, got the judge to at least concede that attempts should be made to make sure that that jury was not all white. Next one. And then there's this. I talked a while ago about the Mau Mau rebellion. You can think about that. You can think about Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. You can think about what's happening now in South Africa. You can think about Ibrahim Traore and all that he's trying to do to alter the minds of other African leaders. A critical issue, the land issue, and the relationship between land and ancestry. Because it was not just a question of possessing bits of Mother Earth, much more fundamental than that, which is why when we pour libation, and we pour, I mean, we spread Goldsmith's carpet, but when, under normal circumstances, when we pour libation, we make a point of pouring into Mother Earth, and that has a massive significance in itself. So that article, Article 15 of those 24 of those 54 articles, I strongly want to bring to your attention. Next one. And then we had the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester 5 years after Marcus Mosiah Garvey died in West Kensington. And the principal message from that, of course, from that Congress was this: Britain had to do something about its color bar. That was the argument. If you gave your life to defeat Nazism, you shouldn't have to face racism and Nazism in the very country you fought to defend. There was that. And then there was the overriding issue, preeminent in the minds and concerns of those at that Congress, that Britain should get out of their countries and allow those countries to become sovereign territories. Next one. I mentioned Ngogi Watayomo and the Mau Mau rebellion. It is worth noting this. Not many people know this, and those who know it try to put a different spin on it than what it actually was. And I dare to say, my friends, that if you want to understand why Britain is so at ease with the massacres going on in Gaza, the annihilation of the Palestinians in Gaza, just look at Britain's own past. It's a nation that has form.
Yes.
It has form. And the kind of disgust about the inhumanity and the sheer indescribable suffering that's being visited upon people in that place. It's basically seen as immaterial. You have that awful man, Biden, embracing Netanyahu as if they're blood brothers, at the same time that Netanyahu is murdering, massacring thousands of people, and then determining that they are going to give them ironclad support because they have a right to defend themselves. These Kenyan people had a right to defend themselves, but they weren't allowed to. They were massacred when they tried to, even though they didn't have the kind of weaponry that the British had and used to murder and massacre them. Next. And that's the conclusion that I've reached. You know, they were not even thinking about fundamental British values, rule of law, right to life and liberty. Those things were not in the vocabulary at that time. Next one. So just to speed up, we all know that Eric Williams wrote this seminal book in 1944. Years later, having studied at SOAS, Walter Rodney published his classic How Europe Underdeveloped Africa with Eric and Jessica Huntley at Bogle Louverture Publications in West Ealing. Next. And since then, staying with this theme, we've had all of these publications, each of them important in its own right. And all of that, of course, underscores the concern about reparations and helps to give momentum to the reparations movement. Next one. So against that background, it is as if those people got bored with the poverty in Grenada and Barbados and Montserrat and those places, and decided to don their khakis and come to Britain to walk from John O'Groats to Land's End as an adventure, or to climb Ben Nevis as an adventure. For anybody to actually say that, coming from the Caribbean, it's much more than ignorance. It's more than political illiteracy. It's dumbfoundedness. Next. And that takes us back to Marcus Mosiah Garvey. This is the quote that everybody knows about him, and it's the one that Bob Marley popularized sometime later. And so when I talk about repairing, mental repair is absolutely critical. And we don't spend enough time thinking about that and talking about it, and in that vein understanding what our responsibility is for that process as far as our own children and grandchildren are concerned. We can talk about all the material conditions and the political context in which we have all of these young people slaughtering one another on the streets. We don't talk enough about the absence of mental emancipation. People of my generation, and many of you in this room, even now, you're involved, built the supplementary school movement. I started the first supplementary school in Cowley Road in Oxford in 1966. And every Saturday, that place was packed. Children came, black students from Oxford University came, parents came. We built a massive learning community. And we had to take on the schools. Because if you were unlucky enough, as far as they were concerned, to speak Jamaican English, what they call patois, then your goose well and truly cooked. So we had to struggle with all of that. When the children came from the Punjab and settled up the way from where I was in St. Giles, in a place called Jericho, the schools had a different attitude towards them. It acknowledged that they came with a mother tongue, Punjabi. But it did not acknowledge that these children from Jamaican households were speaking a language. As far as they were concerned, it was broken English, and that demonstrated that they were stupid and they treated them like imbeciles. So the language question is one that we ourselves haven't talked about enough within our communities.
Absolutely.
Next one. And then to echo that of Marcus Garvey, this is what Ahmed Sekou Touré said in Conakry in 1959. Total liberation from the spirit of the colonized. Now that's particularly important because I think the biggest problem we have in this society is what some people call progress. The system incorporating many of us, including in academia. Thankfully, we're having more and more people getting PhDs, etc., etc., etc. But while that is important in terms of people exercising the right to use their capacities to the fullest, there is a question that remains in terms of what is the role of the academic or the public intellectual in relation to our struggles. If we simply clock up PhDs as if they're going out of fashion, and we are able to, we allow these institutions to say, oh, well, you know, we can take our boxes now. We have these people and they are lecturers and some of them are aspiring pro-vice chancellors and so on and so forth. If that's not registered back into the community from which we come and from which they come, then there's something fundamentally wrong. Because that system swallows you up until it's ready to spit you out. And it happens in every walk of life. Academia, the media, as we know, business, etc. So then when we're talking about rebuilding, we've got to ask questions about where we are situated and how we make the connection between the struggles that people like myself and others in this room have been part of for all these decades and the advancement that now makes it imperative that these institutions stop shutting their doors in our faces. And if you want an example of how fragile all of that is, just look at the number of grandiloquent statements that these institutions made after the George Floyd disaster and where they are now. Somebody should pay somebody to look at all of these statements that were made after George Floyd and ask universities, the health service, transport, whoever, how are you measuring the impact of what you say you were going to do? How is that making a difference to the way the society operates in relation to black people? How is it making a difference to your own recruitment practices, your own career progression practices, and so on? Next one. So, the same process by which religion, schooling, education, media, and culture was part of the indoctrination that went with the erasure and the superimposition when I was growing up in the Caribbean. It is that same process that is at work now. We have to make sure that our children are learning their mother tongue, whether they're from Ghana, Nigeria, Côte d'Ivoire, wherever. It's important that those children understand they may be born in Britain, but they're not of Britain. And their understanding, not only the language, the history of the language, and the role the language has played in their own culture and in their own development is absolutely critical. So I believe that we should all nurture a fundamental belief in the importance of conscientization. It might sound a big fancy word, but it's effectively all the stuff that we've been talking about so far. That grounding, that understanding of how we position ourselves in relation to one another, in relation to the world. Because in the absence of that, we fall for all kinds of stuff. I want to make a couple of comments about that. There is currently an issue that I am a part of that my good man, I saw him around earlier on, Tony Warner, who's in the house somewhere, is part of. Tony has been chairing the steering committee of African Odysseys at the British Film Institute for 17 years. The steering committee is a group of people who have been volunteering their services to make sure that that wretched place does not keep sidelining, excluding films made by black people, whether in this country or elsewhere. And they decided, in concert with people like Chichester, who got rid of Professor Hakim Adi, and this place, Goldsmiths, with Dr. Deirdre Osborne, doing some fantastic work in terms of black literature and what have you. They decided that they want to do a restructure. And they restructured out African Odysseys. Made David Somerset, who was the only member of staff they had driving the African Odysseys program internally, made him redundant. I sent them a letter in October last year, giving them a history of the growth of black film in England and the genesis of much of what African Odyssey was doing. They did not even, well, they replied with some condescending nonsense and then ignored completely everything that I had said in that 9-page stuff I sent them. You could use it in film studies anywhere in the United Kingdom. Ignored it. the steering committee started a petition. And at the time that the BFI simply cut loose, there were 15,000 signatories. Now there are 17,000. The one demand that the steering committee had, quite rightly, was that the BFI should carry out a race equality impact assessment. And our argument was, you have got no part of your own scheduling and programming that's dedicated to black film. We have been doing this voluntarily for 17 years. And you can't now decide that you're going to get rid of it without asking what impact it is going to have on you as providing a public service for the whole community and not just for middle-class white people. They ignored that. And they determined that they would not do a race equality impact assessment. Lo and behold, they get rid of David Somerset because they couldn't afford to keep that section running. And in the last 10 days or so, they've announced that they've appointed an academic from UCL who is going to come and be taking forward their work on black film. So they had no money to support what African Odysseys had done for 17 years, but they can now find money to employ this man from UCL. But what is worse, which is the point I'm trying to get at, is that although that spat between them and the steering committee was well known, and there is no way on earth that he could not have known about it, given what he says his qualifications are for joining them. He did not even bother to contact African Odysseys or the steering committee to ask anything about what had gone on in the last 17 years and what had caused this impasse between the BFI and ourselves. But that's not for the first time. I mean, you know, why should I not put him in the same glass-bottomed boat as Kemi Badenoch and Jamie Lammy and those people? There's a pattern. It's systemic, and we have to understand it. And if you want to understand why it is that Garvey is so important to us today, we've just got to look around us at what is happening. What is happening on the continent itself. What is happening in our own midst. The last thing I wanted to do, I wanted to share with you a case study which is really about, okay. In 2005, I was invited by Dr. Lindiwe Mouza, who was then the South African High Commissioner in London, to join something called the Technical Committee of Experts of the African Union, tasked with the responsibility of working out the modalities for making the global African diaspora the sixth region of Africa. Sister Esther Kosei, whom all of you would know, and I attended summits in Pretoria, in Johannesburg, in Addis Ababa itself. And I stayed with that process from 2006 till 2013. What I was going to share with you, which is in this thing, is the efforts that I made, encouraged by the African Union, at the last summit I attended in Pretoria to establish a sixth region, African Union sixth region chapter here in England. Why was that important? It was important because in the United States of America, in different Caribbean countries, there are civil society organizations that are working towards making this sixth region initiative a reality. And in here, I spelled out the methods that were being used by myself and others to make this happen, and asking the African Union to endorse it so that we can speak with their authority to the British government, Department for International Development, Minister for Africa, God knows what, as well as ensuring that our work was not centered around London, because quite often the diaspora in Birmingham, Derby, Nottingham, Chesterfield, Northampton, those places, never get to know about what is going on. So it was a very detailed account of how we're going to deal with those challenges, and then asking questions about how we actually set up the infrastructure to ensure that there can be a British diaspora voice represented at these African Union summits and so forth. I wrote this thing in 2012. May 2012. Sent it off to the ambassador for the African Union, who was responsible for all of that stuff. I'm still waiting for a reply. Now, what is the point of my raising it here? I'm raising it here because I believe we don't have time today, but we need to reconvene and consider this and its implications and begin to do the damn thing ourselves. What do I mean by that? Quite often, ordinary folk like ourselves get left out of these processes. The African Union loves to operate at governmental levels. They don't even engage with trade unions, never mind anything else. And we know what is happening to our children in the schooling system, in the criminal justice system. We know what's happening to ourselves with the Windrush scandal and all of that kind of stuff. We have to make sure that as African people in the diaspora, we are setting about the business of doing the repairing and the building. But in order to do that, we have to have some serious conversations amongst ourselves. While I shall finish in a minute, I promise you. While these Windrush dunderheads are running around taking little bits of money and organizing street parties and all kinds of stuff to celebrate the arrival of that boat in 1948. The government continues to dump on us from a great height in all kinds of ways, including causing the death, premature death, of people of that generation that came between 1948 and 1978. But it's all to do with Windrush and the Caribbean. It is as if the British state and its border control structures and practices were targeted only at us. There's no attempt made to have common cause with people from West Africa, East Africa, people from South Asia. And it's a kind of self-indulgence on the part of those people. And it suits the state to give them little bits of money to go and do God knows what, because it makes them feel better about themselves. And that's not our purpose. It isn't our business to make racist Britain feel better about itself. And while all of that is going on, there are no meaningful conversations between us and our brothers and sisters from the continent. And all of those nasty prejudices that the colonial system introduced and heaped upon us are still being bandied about on both sides. Our continental brothers and sisters talking rubbish about us, and we talking rubbish about them, and saying who the hell would want to associate with them anyway? Don't tell me nothing about back to Africa. So the same arguments that the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey was having in the 30s, we're having now, or at least we're avoiding now. So if we're going to repair and build, we have to begin at those levels and understand what the modalities must be for making that happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And as we say in Trinidad, all you could beat that.